Good morning. I'm really glad to see everybody back for the second day of the conference. I hope you got a lot out of yesterday and that everybody is ready for another good day here. A lot more connections, a lot more discussion. This first panel this morning, we're going to explain a little more about what both Suf and Gers mentioned a little bit yesterday about what we're doing inside the space station program to try and improve the experience for the user, how we're trying to evolve our space station to be more useful for a research platform, for a laboratory platform, and some things we're doing not just in facilities and process, but in contracting, different approaches to business and things like that. And so in just a moment, I'll introduce the panelists who will go through those. At the macro level, though, Suf mentioned a little bit yesterday some of the things we're doing at a very high level to try and create more crew time for research. We're doing some reconfiguration to enable having four U.S. crew for a total of 7 crew on board, and that'll increase our crew time for research from about an average of 35 hours a week to almost 70 hours a week. So nearly doubling the crew time that's available to do research. And crew time has been our limiting resource for the past, very long time, forever really, Justin's right. And it will get much better when we go to 7 crew, although honestly, I kind of expect crew time is always going to be our limiter. I think with the plans that the program is making for cargo vehicles and things, that upmass will not become the constraint. I do think it's going to be crew time, and that's something we need to keep in mind as you design experiments and things. The more efficient you can be in how you use crew time, and the more judicious in your choices about automation versus crew involvement is going to help to get more and more research. So we've heard a lot of feedback over the past year. Ryan Prouty led a panel last year and has continued to work on our processes. And all the feedback we got is that it's still really hard to get to station. There's still an amazing pile of paperwork that has to be done. We've heard that, we've taken that to heart, and we are really working to improve our processes and to simplify our requirements so that the only requirements you truly have to meet are those that are going to keep the crew safe, those that are going to keep the vehicle safe, and those that are going to prevent us from having any kind of damage to the other systems on the vehicle that support all the other payloads. But what that means, the result of that is there's a lot less paperwork. It should be a lot cheaper and quicker for you to get to orbit, but it also means that a lot of those requirements that we're removing that we had added to the program over the years were really there to help ensure mission success, to ensure that your payload functioned when it got to orbit, to ensure that your research could be accomplished, and we're taking all those out. We're not going to require that you verify all those kinds of requirements. We're still more than happy and supportive and available to provide expertise and to help ensure that you truly understand the interfaces and how things need to work. But we're not going to force you to do paperwork to tell us you understood that. But what that means is that mission success is now kind of back in your control, and it allows you to do as much or as little as you want to prove that your research is going to be successful. And that's a major shift in how we think about things in the program. I mean, through the shuttle era, right, mission success was always critically important, and even all through the assembly of space station, right? Failure's not an option. You've heard that from, Apollo 13 and all those other great space movies, right? Okay, we're not going to be responsible for failure being an option at this point. It's up to the researcher to decide how much failure do you want to, how much risk do you want to take? How quickly do you want to get to orbit? How much do you want to do? And I bring that up specifically because it is a huge shift in how we think, and I will tell you it is a very, very difficult mindset change within the program. But we've heard you talk about things like OPNOM and how difficult that process is, and labels, and where the labels have to go, and how much verification you have to do about the labels, and other things like that. We're going to take it all out, and it's going to be up to you. And if the labels are such that the crew can't figure out what to do with your payload, that's going to be kind of on you at this point, right? So little things like that have built up big bureaucracy, big teams, big discussions over the years. We're going to take them all out. We seriously are, but it's going to be a big change. So with that, I want to introduce our three panelists. Let's see. I'm sorry. We're going to start with Ryan. Ryan Prouty is the lead for our RISE team. RISE is Revolutionize ISS for Science and Exploration. Ryan has been leading that effort now with the team for not quite a year, and she's going to talk through some of the changes we're making there. You've heard us mention the word, you've heard us talk about RISE. She's going to actually explain what all that means and how it affects you. And then Dana Weigel is the manager of our vehicle office. So Dana's whole office is responsible for keeping the vehicle in the air, sustaining it, making sure it's available for us for research. And she's going to talk about some of the changes that we're making to modify the platform to continue to support research and improve capabilities for research. They not only in that office manage, to keep the life support systems and all those things working, they also are fundamentally responsible for all the payload facilities capabilities, things like the big racks that provide a certain research field. So Dana's going to talk some about that. And then at the end, Mike Reed is going to talk about changes we're making and how we're doing contracting, how we're approaching it to make it easier for you to get business done with us, for us to be able to get business done with you, and that's all affected by kind of how we're changing our processes and what capabilities we have in the vehicle, how we're trying to help commercialize space with our different contracting approaches. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan and let her go through the RISE discussion.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. So Mary Beth told you RISE stands for Revolutionize ISS for Science and Exploration. Seferdini and Mr. Gerstenmaier both mentioned it yesterday, and this, back in September of last year, we took on this initiative in station when we realized that we needed to transition our program from a mindset of assembling a space vehicle to one of utilizing a space vehicle. And that all stems from our vision and mission. When you look at a process of re-engineering a program, that's where you start. What your vision says should reflect the values of your organization. Your mission should reflect your cultural norms or your behaviors or how people do their jobs. And so starting from the top and understanding the value system associated with our vision led us down this path of renaming or re-engineering our core processes inside Space Station. And so we labeled those, the four you see up here, Steward Discovery, Foster Commerce in Space, Foster International Collaboration, and Inspire the World. When you step back and look at those four core processes, that is the reason for ISS existence. That's why we're there, that's why we built it, that's why we're there to use it every day for those four reasons. The principles of this entire RISE effort are about changing our culture in station. As Mary Beth said, we've done business a certain way for so long, but we absolutely had to do it that way to build the vehicle that we have up there today, to build that laboratory, that facility that we can now use for this groundbreaking research, for fostering commercial enterprise, for giving a destination for commercial companies to go to bounce off of, to build that enterprise in low Earth orbit. We had to be precise, we had to be timely. Now we need to rethink about how we do our work every day in Space Station. The line that we use as we think about our processes and how people do their jobs is making the right thing to do the easiest thing to do. For those of you who have been through some of our processes before, sometimes we can make it really hard. There's a lot of paperwork to fill out. We have a lot of requirements that we have set up. And when we step back and look at the values that we've assigned to each of our core flows to match the values of the customers for those core flows, we have to think about what's the right way to do business? What's the easy way? Sometimes it's just plain common sense is how we should be setting up some of our processes. And so that's how we're trying to rethink about how we do our work every day. And I'll talk more in a couple slides into the key enabling processes. So for the cores, as I said, these are your reason for existence. They align, they flow directly from the vision and mission, and they deliver the product directly to the customer. Each core process has a unique customer. So for Steward Discovery, our customer is the science, technology, and exploration community. For Foster Commerce and Space, for example, the customer is the commercial community who is trying to build a business in space. And when we look and understand at the value system associated with each of those customers, we build our processes and our activities that we do inside a space station to match the value system of that customer. So we have to understand who the customer is. And this is the big light bulb for everybody in space station. Up until now, we're the government, we've been the customer. And that's the mindset shift we're trying to make. We are no longer the customer. The people using the space station are the customer. You guys are our customer, and we are trying to rethink about what activities we perform to enable you to do what you want to do on space station. And as Mary Beth said, that's a huge shift in how we think about doing our work every day in space station. So I'm gonna, okay, there you go. I thought the next slide was different. Some of the highlights for Steward Discovery I wanted to talk about today, and how we're changing some of those processes. So how we integrate payloads on space station. Number one, we want to align the milestone or the template to integrate your payload to space station with your development cycle or your schedule. Right now, we're very siloed, and safety has their process that they follow, and requirements has their process, and ops has their process. And they're all using their own template. And we have asked our users to meet those templates. And those templates are historically based on launch dates. Dating back to Shuttle and Apollo, how we manage our hardware that's going to launch on a vehicle is based on a launch minus template. We're trying to rethink that as the customer. We want to manage our timeline based on your development cycle. You tell us when you think you will be ready to fly, and we will go manage what vehicle to put you on. Tailoring ops for integration support. As we look at what we need to do to help you get ready for operations on orbit, we will tailor what you need. Some of you are very experienced and need less support. Some of you are less experienced and need more support. And so instead of sending everybody through the same process to help with building procedures and training and defining what maybe your flight rules or regulations may be, will be defined on what you really need from us. Rather than us dictating to you, here's the process you have to go through and you have to check every single box, it will be more about what your needs are and how can we support those needs for you. Part of that is we're still going to need some data as you go through the process, but we realize one of the biggest inputs that we got over the last year as I've been out talking with the community is how we gather data from you. We ask oftentimes for the same data in multiple different databases or different formats at different times, and we're going to pull all that together so we're only asking for one piece of data one time and be better about disseminating that through the program. So anybody in the program who's doing work for you to help you integrate your payload will all be using the same set of data. The last two are really about the customer service aspect, improving our communications with the customer, and doing more recognition and outreach with the customer. You know, part of one of our core processes of Inspire the World, and Bill talked about this yesterday, we need to be inspiring the people walking down the streets of Boston about what exciting things we're doing on space station. That same philosophy applies to inspiring people inside the space station. There's a lot of people who work on space station, and everybody is realizing now that everybody's working for the customer. So these stories that we're hearing about the amazing science discoveries you guys are making, we need to bring those back into the program and inspire our own people. And that's part of how we do this culture shift to get everybody in space station to realize why they do their work every day. That's the crux of the culture change, is everybody understanding the big why. And part of that is recognition and outreach and opening up those lines of communication even more than they are today. There we go. So after we defined our core processes and really got to the crux of why space station exists, you have to understand what has to be in place to make those processes work. And we call those our enabling processes. This is the engine room. These processes help the cores. These processes support the cores. And I'm only going to highlight a couple today: ensure safety and manage the interfaces. This is our requirements and verification process, because these two alone are the two that we had the most inputs on over the last year. And so we focused a lot in our reengineering activities on these two processes specifically. Okay, for safety, our safety process up until now has been very one-size-fits-all. We gather our data, we do our reviews where we're defining our hazards, defining our controls, and then showing that we met those controls. We tried to revolutionize this flow. What we found in going out and looking at industry and seeing how other people do their safety processes, it's a sound process. But there are different ways that we can implement this process that are more customer-friendly, if you will. And so what we plan to do is tailor the flows based on two criteria. One is your experience as a provider and your hardware complexity. So let's say that you are a brand new provider and you have a pretty complex piece of hardware. We're going to offer you more support, more guidance as you go through the process to help you understand what we're talking about, to show you examples, to show you templates, to help you know how to define hazards and control hazards. On the other hand, if you are an extremely experienced PD, you've done this before, it's not your first rodeo, and you're flying a pretty simple payload, there are less milestones you have to meet and less overhead from us double-checking your work so we can get you through the process a little bit faster. And this falls in line with what Mary Beth and Mike talked about yesterday, trying to get people to orbit as quick as we can, but still safely. So we'll still be looking at the hazards and the controls, but in a manner that matches your expertise or the complexity of your hardware, instead of trying to put everybody in the same box. The next thing that we have done, and this should be coming out fairly soon actually, is updating our hazard definitions for payloads. Historically, we've had different definitions of catastrophic and critical between payloads and systems. We have held payloads to a higher standard, and this is from shuttle era days when we had our crew, actually our return vehicle carrying our crew in the same vehicle that we were doing our experiments in. We're balancing the board. We are making the same definition of catastrophic and critical for systems and payloads. And what that means to you is possibly a reduction in controls or an easier way to look at your hazards. The last one, and I talked about this one on the last slide, improve data handling and delivery. We realized that we have a lot of crossover between safety and requirements, and so we're leveling that out. We're going to get rid of the reduction in requirements that you guys have to verify between the two. You'll only verify the same requirement in one place, and we'll share the data internal into the program. And the last bullet on there, reducing delivery times. This also goes back to the first bullet based on your complexity, hardware complexity, as well as your experience base. That will help us better define when you need to turn your data in for your safety reviews. If you're experienced and it's simple hardware, we're not going to ask for it a month and a half in advance. Okay, manage interfaces. One of our largest, what we call enablers, it's a tool that helps us make the right thing to do, the easiest thing to do, was to review all of our interface requirements. We have a lot of them, we realize that. And We've had a team since March going off and line by line reviewing every requirement we have documented for the interface. And this goes back to what Mary Beth was talking in transitioning the mission success to you, the provider. This is how we're doing it, is rewriting those requirements. And any requirement that is not defined as safety of crew or safety of vehicle is no longer a shall requirement. It turns to a should. So they will be available to you so you understand the interface, but it will not be a requirement that we, NASA, require you show us and prove to us the verification. So that's how we're implementing that philosophy, is how we write our interface requirements for your payloads. Eliminating duplicative processes. I talked about the silos in the program, and one of the areas that we do this in is when we have paperwork in one area, we make you go redo it in another area so everybody can have a nice clean sheet in their area. And one of the places that we're going to reduce some of that duplication is here in requirements. If we have, as an example, let's say you have an EME exception on your hardware. So there's a piece of paper that we have to write for our EME panel to say that it's okay, we're not going to damage anything on the space station. We go redo that paperwork in the requirements world. We're not going to do that anymore. Wherever the owning organization is for that piece of paper, that exception, that requirement, it will stay there and everybody else will recognize it. So we're not duplicating paper just for duplicating paper. We're also going to transition to electronic requirements. We're trying to get away from writing a formal document for every single payload, for every single flight. We're just going to do a matrix of requirements. It'll be online. You can click your verification. Should be much less overhead in doing the work that we need to do to go integrate for space station. And I already also talked about the IT interface as far as gathering your data. Part of that work will also be improving the interface where you currently go in to do your verifications, and that will all be rolled into the electronic requirements as well. So this is my last slide. You know, when we went and started this activity in September, the support in program from the top down has been consistent and steady. We absolutely realize that it's time to make some of these changes in order to go into our future the way that we need to do the science, to make the discoveries, to foster commercial enterprise in space. We know we have to do this, and it's actually pretty exciting to watch the people in space station and the ideas they're coming up with and the changes that they're already making to make that happen. Really thinking about why we're doing what we're doing and aligning everything with the values associated with the right customer. It's a new way to think about our jobs, and it does take time. I've talked to a number of you in person who have flown before. I appreciate your patience, and there is a very strong belief in the space station that this timing is critical, and we're very much looking forward to how we look and how we work our processes differently this time next year. And with that, I will hand over to Dana.
Let's see, so I'm going to talk to you about the payload facilities that we currently have on the vehicle and a number of the upgrades and new capabilities that we're developing. So as you guys have all heard, and as you're aware, we have a very unique platform for doing science in space. It's very well suited for doing long duration studies with exposure to microgravity and the harsh space environment. There are a lot of different areas where you can do research on the vehicle and a lot of different physical locations for accommodating that, both inside and outside the vehicle. There's near continuous comm data and video to the ground that's accessible anywhere around the world. And as you know, with it being a manned spacecraft, there's opportunity for having crew-tended experiments, but you can also do the experiments through automated means or through ground control or even robotic assistance. The vehicle was designed to be modular so that we can easily upgrade and replace components to keep up with technology and science needs. One of the other important things that we're doing with the vehicle is evolving the overall operational concept. The goal is really to have it look and feel just like a ground laboratory. And what I mean by that is in the execution, we really want to be able to iterate, to have a little trial and error with the experimentation. One of the things we've been doing a lot more of over the last year is tying both the payload developers or the actual investigators into the communication system with the crew to have them work directly with the crew, to collaborate with the crew to help iterate with the experiment instead of just having the crew run a pre-scripted procedure. There are a number of multi-purpose use facilities inside the vehicle. One of them you see in the top right corner, that's called the express rack. That's the size basically of a refrigerator, and there are 8 of those on the vehicle. They hold, each of them hold 8 locker size kind of experiment bays and 2 smaller drawers. And you can actually group together the experiments in groups of 4 if you want a larger experiment. It provides a number of services like nitrogen, vacuum access, power, data, video, cooling, et cetera. So a lot of capability there. We also have a glove box. In the lower left corner, you can see astronaut Mike Full working with the glove box. That provides for containment for things that may have fluids, particulates, hazardous materials. We do both life sciences and physical sciences in that glove box. And then across the vehicle, there are a number of other racks and systems for accommodating payloads. We are developing 2 new basic express racks. One of the changes that we've made with the new design is we've moved this utility panel here down to the bottom. That will allow for insertion of larger experiments that could actually take up to all 8 of those lockers in that rack. We're also developing a new glove box called the Life Science Glove Box. It's quite a bit larger than the current glove box, but the really significant feature is that 2 crew members can access the internal volume and work together. So when Seferdini talked yesterday about the rodent dissections, that's one of the really big benefits and what we're really looking forward to with this. You can do a lot of parallel operations now, working together in the glove box. We are also doing some upgrades to the existing glove box, including taking the front window and making it on-orbit removable so that the crew can easily set up for experiment. So that's going to help us out quite a bit with overall crew time. On the outside of the vehicle, there are numerous areas where you can attach payloads pointing in any direction, so you can do Earth observation, sun pointing, deep space. Each of the partners have capabilities too for attaching payloads. The top module there is the ESA Columbus module, and on the right-hand side you can see there are a number of payload attached sites on the end cone. The Japanese module, the GEM, has an external facility. It's a very large platform that accommodates a large number of payloads. And then all around the vehicle in various areas, we have what we call express logistics carriers, which are other platforms for hosting payloads. The Japanese also have an airlock on the GEM, which we use for deploying small satellites for transferring experiments inside and outside if we needed to do that. And then we can also attach, for very large payloads or payloads with unique requirements, we can directly mount them to different places on the vehicle. One example of that is the alpha magnetic spectrometer. It's got a direct mount to the vehicle. We are working to expand our capabilities for external payload sites and locations. Also expanding our ability to do small satellite deployments. And one other way you can attach to the vehicle, we've got a number of ports that are around the modules. A number of those are used for our visiting vehicles, crewed vehicles, but there are a few extra ports. And so something that's a large module type payload, an example is the Bigelow expandable module. So the bottom left corner there, you can see a picture of that. That's actually connected to one of our berthing ports directly to the vehicle. As Mary Beth mentioned earlier, we're also making a number of other modifications to the vehicle to really optimize utilization on board. We've built a galley rack that's flying up in August on the HTV mission. This will enable us to consolidate all of the crew's food preparation hardware. It's right now taking up valuable spots in the express racks, so that'll free up space in the express racks. We're also developing a water storage and handling system to optimize all of the logistics and storage of water. Right now, the crew spends a lot of time with these water bags having to transfer around water, and it takes up a lot of crew time, so this is going to save us quite a bit of crew time. And then an ongoing effort that we have is related to on-orbit stowage and inventory and our overall sparing. So there's, just like a house that you've lived in for quite a while, you start to store things in different areas, and at some point you got to reorganize to really make the operations efficient. So that's an ongoing effort for us. We are upgrading our data communication systems outside the vehicle. We've got a region right now where all of our payload sites are that have wireless. We're going to extend that so that the entire vehicle has wireless Ethernet coverage. We are doubling our telemetry and video bandwidth for payloads. We are working on a couple ground system upgrades to make our communications throughout our orbit more continuous. And we're also implementing a disruption-tolerant network on board and on the ground systems. So if you've ever commanded to space station, you've got to be cognizant of our communication gaps. And as you try to retrieve data after a communication gap, there's a little bit more overhead right now today with how we store the data and pull it down. Once we implement this system, it'll be seamless to the investigator. You won't have to be cognizant or worried about when exactly you have comm coverage. In terms of physical science capabilities, we've got a combustion rack facility on board. Right now, we're doing liquid-based combustion experiments. We're building 2 new inserts, so soon we'll be able to do both gas and solid combustion, and we also have enhanced image processing that comes along with that. We've got a fluids research facility on board that has with it a light microscopy module that's part of that instrument suite. Any number of experiments can be done there, looking at 2-phase flow, capillary flow, colloid experiments. For material science, we have another research rack. Right now, we're doing melting and solidification experiments with metal alloys. One of the upgrades we're looking at is levitating the sample inside the chamber so it's not actually contacting the cartridge. We have a lot of new capabilities that have come along and that are still in work in the biological research arena. There are a lot of different options for doing small model organism research on the vehicle. For plant and seedling growth, we have a habitat called Veggie. It's in the top right corner there. You can see it growing some red romaine lettuce. We can vary the lighting in that, and that uses the cabin atmosphere. We are developing an advanced plant habitat, which will be an even larger enclosure, and that'll have an isolated, controllable, self-contained environmental control system. For fruit fly experimentation, there are a number of different options there. You can do multi-generational studies. You can selectively add or remove generations, add fixatives along the way. We're developing a new bioculture system for cell research. You could also do bacteria or virus research. It's shown there on the right-hand side. There are 10 separate environmentally controlled chambers or cartridges that house the cells. There's a feed system that will introduce the nutrients. That's a selectable system, so you can decide how and when you want to feed that. It's got automated change out of the media. You can do sampling directly from it and also add other solutions or fixatives. And the great thing about this particular research instrument is it's very low crew intensive. So most of this is commandable. So once the crew sets it up, a lot of the rest of that is commandable through the ground. We also have a space automated bioproduct lab. We call it SABLE. That is an incubator, refrigerator, and freezer system that has capability to accommodate a number of different inserts. And we are working to develop a multipurpose variable G platform, which is basically 2 independent spinning rotors. So as an example, you could set one to emulate a 1G environment as a control and have the other one at whatever G level or microgravity. You can independently stop them and remove and replace cartridges. They can accommodate inserts that, again, have environmentally controlled chambers. And you can do fruit fly, cell science, plant algae, even protein crystal growth. So we're excited about that. It gives us a lot of capability. For rodent research, and ISSRDC talked a little bit about this yesterday, but to give you a little more detail, we can do up to 90-day missions with 40 mice. We are working to incorporate male mice studies as part of our capability, and also working on live animal return. There are a lot of options for cold stowage of the science samples. On the left side of the screen there, that bar chart shows you the temperature ranges of our various freezers. The latest one we've added to the set is called Polar. Right now, we're mostly using this for transport, so we've got it on the visiting vehicle for delivery and return of samples. The significance of this piece of hardware for us is that it has twice the internal volume available for stowage. We're also developing a rapid freeze capability to add to our suite of cold stowage. For onboard analysis capability, we've recently developed what we call Wet Lab 2. That is basically an RNA smart cycler that allows us to do gene expression analysis on orbit. Right now, if you want insight into your sample, we've got to return it and do the analysis on the ground. It's really important for us to have this on orbit so that during the course of an experiment, you can go and do your analysis and, as needed, tweak the treatments or the experiment as you go through the experiment. We are building a water monitoring system that will be capable of analyzing silica, microbes, and organic content in the water. NanoRacks is building a 3rd-generation microscope. This will be a digital microscope with optical zoom capability of 240 times. It's a handheld portable device, so very easy to take around the vehicle to use for different experiments. In terms of Earth and space science capabilities, I talked to you a little bit earlier about accommodations outside the vehicle, but there are also some opportunities for viewing from within the vehicle. We have a couple of different windows in the U.S. lab on the top right corner there. You can see a picture of it. It's a nadir-facing window. We've got a rack. We call this the wharf rack. This is in front of the window, and it allows you to directly mount various cameras or sensors and connect them up for data and video. So it's a very easy way to change out different sensors and do Earth viewing. We also have the cupola. And I don't know if anyone ever found the image yesterday, but here it is. So this is the symbol of our conference. Here's a great shot of the cupola. You're looking at the side windows. It's also got a very large center window. We did a lot of our IMAX filming out of the cupola, for those of you who intend to go see the IMAX film. With the station's inclination in orbit, we have visibility to 75% of the Earth's surface. 95% of that is overpopulated landmass, so we can see quite a bit. And we remap that every 1 to 3 days. So you get to repeat that every few days. We've got a number of new commercial external platforms that will soon be delivered to space station. The first category there is related to materials and electronic component research. There are a couple facilities that enable us to put different material samples or electronic components and monitor the degradation and the performance of the materials. This helps with things like spacecraft future design and reliability. The two that we have are the NanoRacks External Payloads Platform, or NREP as we call it. That is flying in August on the HTV mission. And then we have the MISSI, or Materials on ISS experiment, that's coming a bit later. There's also a commercial Earth observation platform being developed called MUSES. This can accommodate 2 large sensors or payloads and 2 small ones. It's on a platform that can be maneuvered and pointed with very high accuracy. So that is a very, very quick, high-level overview of the capabilities on the vehicle. Hopefully that gave you an idea of the types of research that you can do and how you can attach to the vehicle. There's a lot more information available. I would encourage you, please, if you want to know more about any of what I've presented or what else we can do on the vehicle, we have the ISS help desk set up. We'll get you the information that you're looking for. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to Mike.
So Monday night at the social, I was visiting with a new colleague from Northeastern University. We were talking about what his interests were, and they were the commercialization of space, which coincides with our own. And so I was kind of trying to get a feel for his background and find out what his interests were, what his education was, and so I asked him. And he told me his philosophy. And I said, my thought was, what in the hell does philosophy have to do with commercialization of space? And it turns out I didn't think that. I asked it. And he explained to me that philosophy is a deep dive, a critical thinking dive into something that's known, a science, an item, a thing, a way of thinking, turning it on its ear, looking at it from all angles, trying to better understand it, debating it, vigorously debating it to learn how to better exploit it and better implement whatever that thing is. And I thought, because I'm a deep thinker too. And I realized maybe that's exactly the approach to how we go about a higher and maybe a fuller use, non-traditional use of the space station, and for this purpose, from a commercial perspective. And so the more we talked about it, the more I thought about it and realized that maybe we've been going about this too linearly. Maybe it does take turning the status quo on its ears, as it were, and trying to figure out new and unique ways of using the ISS. The goal of our Congress, when it declared the NASA resources on board as a national lab, was to increase the non-traditional users, to increase stakeholders in the vehicle itself, but to get in a broader participation from a research perspective. And so to that end, they wanted us to dedicate fully 50% of the resources we had to doing this. That's how committed they were. So CASIS was established to go off and mine, if you will, and develop this interest that really didn't exist at the time with academia, with corporations, nonprofits, and other government agencies. So they've done that, and over the last 3.5 years, they have really started to get traction in that demand side market, if you will, for the research. But while Station is a fantastic vehicle for a broad range of research and technology development, we're coming to realize it's also a perfect test bed for utilizing new business relationships, new partnerships. And so to that end, we're working a little bit on the supply side from the NASA perspective. So when CASIS finds a research customer, perhaps, that has a capability need that we don't have on the ISS, or they find somebody that has a unique capability that may be operating in terrestrial labs, but we have nothing like it on the ISS, and they want to develop that capability so they can offer it as a service to new customers, to new research customers. So we work hand in glove with CASIS in that regard to enable the new capabilities. But what we're trying to get away from is a traditional model where our contractors that have great expertise and great experience in designing and building spaceflight hardware would build that hardware to our spec or to our system's requirements. They would be paid to build it, be paid to sustain it, and then be paid to build the next thing. And so what we're trying to do is get them to become a stakeholder with a vested interest in using the ISS to turn a business model. So we become a customer, whether we have to help fund some of the development, that's fine. We have means to do that. Whether they don't need our funding, but they want to be able to sell service to us, we can do that as well. But the bottom line is we start migrating away from the way we've done business in the past, because frankly our budgets don't support it anymore. We would like to upgrade capabilities where it makes sense, and in doing so we want something in return, and that's a new stakeholder. That's somebody who has a vested interest in the ISS, who is able to go out and market it, because our NASA business isn't going to be enough to close a business model for them. And that's not a bad thing, because if they're out marketing, they're leveraging what CASIS is already doing in tapping new potential customers and bringing non-traditional users to the space station that can then find value in using it as a research vehicle. So how do we do that? We've got several mechanisms we can use. We use Space Act agreements quite extensively. Mostly what we use are non-funded Space Act agreements. Those are to grant the real estate, if you will. We consider ourselves a landlord of our share of the space station and the operator of the facility. And so we write a Space Act agreement to grant that onboard real estate. That's a formal document, a very powerful document for the commercial entity to show a relationship with NASA. They can take that document, they can use it to market to customers to show that, yea, verily, they have rights to use space station in the way that we have established that they would do so. They can also use it to raise money. We had a fantastic panel yesterday afternoon to talk about that very thing, and how do research firms and how do firms that want to provide a service, how can they go about developing the investor base to fund what it is they want to do? And that Space Act agreement is a very powerful document. We can move from there into cooperative agreements where we can provide funding. The model we've tried to use is we'll provide less than 50% of the funding required, which puts the onus on the new commercial partner to go raise funds and or invest their own funds to flesh out the capability. We're even willing to provide some of our funding more on the front end than what the service provision would generally require. But we do take services on the back end. We get equal value back in provision of services once the new capability, once the hardware has been developed and checked out and flown. So it very much puts NASA and the partner in equal standing. We both have a vested interest in seeing the new capability up there, or our front-end money is wasted. And they have a vested interest in marketing, which is important to us, and bringing in new customers, because it's going to take that to close the business case on the back end. So the cooperative agreement is also a powerful instrument that we use. And finally, what we're also using is more of a instead of a cost-plus contracting, we use what we call an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, IDIQ. It's a menu of services, fixed price, that allows them to sell services not only to NASA, but because NASA as a government agency has a contractual relationship with an entity. Other government agencies can work with NASA, transfer funds to us to utilize our contractual mechanisms. So from that perspective, it becomes like a mini GSA schedule for them, which not just giving them access to NASA as a customer, it opens up the entire federal government to them as a potential customer. And so that's a very important aspect of our contractual mechanisms as well. The overriding issues, I guess you will, the theme changes that we're having to work with is our contractors needing to become business partners, and frankly NASA needing to get away from owning hardware, from specifying everything down to the nuts and the bolts and everything else about the hardware, to becoming a customer. And we're doing that. We've had some success. We've got a number of our providers that are now operating a business model on ISS. UTC is operating Sabatier. NanoRacks has a number of facilities. It was mentioned by Dana that we've got facilities upcoming. We've got the Muses platform by Teledyne Brown. We've got an MVP centrifuge by TechShot. We've got a lot of bioserve capabilities. So there's a number. We got external MISTI platform by MEI. So we're getting some traction in the model that I just described, whereas we're not owning hardware. We don't pay to sustain it. The sustaining has to come out of their marketing. And frankly, that's a really good thing. That's important for us to see them out leveraging what CASIS is doing, what NASA has laid the ground to do, and frankly, we want to see them become successful, because one of the questions asked yesterday at the investor forum was right at the end, and it was a new startup, and he's going like, this is just the most exciting thing he's ever done. They got funded to fly an investigation. It's upcoming. And he said, what can I do to show and help benefit this whole experiment of new users and ISS, and how we go about showing value to that? And I wanted to scream at him, make money, show value out of this magnificent vehicle that we have all put together. Show value. And I think that is the most important thing. Profit is a good word. It is absolutely important, if we're going to be successful from a business perspective, that not just from a research perspective, but there is a service supply side that is actually making money using the ISS. While we've got it, it's got a finite life. We don't know how long that is, but we want to exploit the hell out of it. Let's find out what it can do. Let's think about it from different perspectives than we have before. If we're successful, and this is not just we, NASA, this is an international endeavor. Our partners are equally enthused about showing greater throughput to their taxpayers that have funded everybody's into this. And so it's a lab. It's a national lab declared by our Congress, but it's bigger than that. It's an international lab. And if we're successful, once this vehicle is done, there will be a thriving, robust, vibrant economy in low Earth orbit, and very likely participants of commercial entities on whatever we do next. Exploration is almost a certainty that if we can have an international partnership that succeeds in low Earth orbit, it's not of our reach to say that there's going to be a commercial partner in an exploration program. It was also brought up yesterday, well, you know, one of the investors said that he's got enough interest that we could fill 3 space stations. And the question was asked, well, what happens if you do? We can't support that. And it's just like, oh, yeah, we can. Because what we can't support leaves plenty of margin for commercial participation. And that's exactly what the ISS is about. That's what commercial exploitation of the ISS is about. It's to prove that it's possible to actually run a business using space. Very tough place to operate. And we're not the easiest processes to get through either, but as Ryan said, we're working on that. But if we can show success using ISS and show those that come next who might build a free flyer or an operating facility outside of the ISS or in proximity to the ISS, don't know what it looks like, don't have to. We will be successful. We can't create a market. What we can do is set an environment that enables smart people in industry, academia, to come and fill the niche. So we don't know what it's going to look like. We've had surprises already. The CubeSat deployers, nobody saw that coming, but somebody in industry saw, Nanorax saw a niche, said, we'd like to try to fill this. And it's a fantastic success. That's just one of many, and there's many more. So if we're successful, when ISS is done, there will be an economy there that can be sustained on its own. And not only will the legacy of ISS be the strength of the international partnership, it will be a thriving economy. So in summation, maybe in the end, maybe it's equal parts rocket science and philosophy. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we're going to take questions. I think there's a microphone here near the front on both sides, and then Justin's got a walk around for the middle and kind of the back of the room. So if you have any questions, please come ask them. Hi, Reg.
Hi, Mary Beth. A quick question. For many years, our European payloads would go through the PSRP at Johnson. And eventually, we franchised the European PSRP, so they did their own safety work. So I wonder if there's been any thought of extending that process to your contractors so that we would do maybe the bulk of the safety work on our team. We're franchised. Maybe we only do a phase 3 with the safety panel at JSC.
So I'll tell you, we have talked about that internally with NASA. As a part of RISE, it's not on my charts. What we're really trying to do with building those flows specifically for the provider experience and the complexity is to build that level of trust. And I think what you're talking about is a future generation, a next step. I will tell you we're not there yet, but we definitely did talk about it, and I wouldn't call it off the table. I think it's definitely in the future, but not for our first steps.
Okay. We would like to input to that if we get that opportunity.
Sure.
Thanks.
Also, if you guys would put up the last chart before the backup, that we have a real quick survey. We want a web-based survey and SurveyMonkey. If, as you're sitting there and we're going through Q&A, if you guys would be so kind, if you're willing and interested to fill out the survey, it would help us to gather data on how things are going and what we need to keep working on. Okay, yeah, so if you can go to this web address, if you would, if you're interested and willing to provide us some input while you're sitting here and we're going through Q&A, that'd be great. Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Lead at NASA Goddard. So I'm asking not in my Goddard role, but as a space enthusiast. Are you guys going to roll out a new model for space tourism? And have you thought about offering commercial stays on board the ISS and what the right price point is and how that business model might look? And if
Everybody's
not,
looking
may I
at me, so
suggest
I
it?
guess I get to have this one. Have we thought about it? Oh, heck yeah. I mean, you can't exist today without thinking about that. Does ISS lend itself to that? I'm not sure. Our resources are scarce. So even when we have new commercial entities that want to operate on ISS, we still have to vet that to make sure it's the highest and best use of a very expensive investment. So does space tourism make sense? Yeah, I think it does someday. And I think the things we're doing with our commercial cargo and our commercial crew providers by enabling them to develop new vehicles and as Elon said yesterday, to help drive down the cost of the access to space, maybe that's the most important thing that we can do while we have the space station.
Okay.
We already have policy for that called spaceflight participants. Well, we already have that document. We've had several space force on the station.
Yeah, Sam's comment that you couldn't hear was that we have a spaceflight participant policy, and so our Russian colleagues have definitely entertained some of those, and so we have means to do that. As a regular thing, it's a little more difficult for us because the crew time is so valuable to us from a research perspective.
So we got it one way in the back there.
Hi, Peter Liu again, actually one of the PIs in the Fluid Integrations Rack. I had a brief comment in terms of philosophy and rocket science, and then a mechanics question for Ryan. But first, I'm very, very encouraged by what you guys are saying because it brings economic sustainability into the model in an era of reduced government resources. And I think to your point, right, as technology evolves, building the next space station or the next type of thing will cost an order of magnitude less. And I think, you know, we may be able to bend that curve so that it sustains on its own, and then not just the station, but low Earth orbit, microgravity, and research in general sort of has a path, a glide path for infinite sustainability. And I think that's a very, very important thing in today's era of sort of budgetary cuts. Now, my question for Ryan actually is with RISE. So let's say I'm an investigator, whether in academia or a small business, and we're seeing all these process improvements. But now there's a whole ecosystem of people to work with, right? So cases, and then we'll go out with a contractor with the experience to build the hardware and get it certified. So where are these process improvements going to, is that going to interface with cases, with the contractor, with me? How, as the sort of end user, as a researcher, am I going to see and experience these changes that you're making?
No, that's a good question. Most of it will be in, you'll feel the result more than you'll see the change in your interface, if you will. So we really want to leave intact a singular interface into the program. So through the PIMs and RIMs that currently work with either implementation partners or PDs directly, they will be the ones who interface back into the program to the processes that have changed, and the end result is less overhead, less resource hit on the PDs, less activities that you guys have to do your integration. And so that's kind of how it will flow down. The idea is to, right now I know you guys have 10, 20, 30 interfaces in the program, and we're trying to get ourselves better organized and break the silos across the organizations in the program so we can reduce your interface, which in the end reduces your overhead and gets you to flight faster.
Right.
This is a question mainly for Dana, I think. Could you give us a status or update of a couple of facilities, the low temperature physics facility and the acoustic levitator? I think it was run by Space Drums. Could you give us an update of those facilities?
Do you have updates on either one?
So, space travel, the low temp physics, I'm not sure about. So, I'm going to address the second one first, because I'm not exactly sure I know which one you're referring to with the low temperature physics facility. If you're talking about the cold atom lab, there's the low temperature physics facility. That's the cold atom lab or the condensed atom lab, depending on which way you call it. That's in development. They have been working through some issues in the core part of the hardware, the physics package, as they call it. They think they've found a problem that has caused some failures in the physics package, and they're reworking that with a vendor, and they're still on track to fly in 2017, very into 2017, to get that condensed atom lab to orbit. And then the Space Drums hardware, the levitation, the materials processing facility, after many, many different attempts to recover that hardware and determine what the issues were with operation, it's actually been brought back to the ground to try and repair it. And Space Drums is working to develop, see if they've got enough commercial interest and funding in order to make the changes and see if they can put it back on orbit or not. But right now it actually has been brought down because the issues were such that they could not be repaired on orbit. All right, any other questions? All right, we really do appreciate your time and attention. Again, if you have any other questions or specific areas you want to ask about, we do have the ISS Help Desk up at the top of the escalator on the 4th floor. We have people staffed there all day today and tomorrow, and they're taking your questions through a really cool tool and sending us all emails so that we can contact you and sit down and meet with you before the conference is over. And if you have a moment, if you'd please fill out the Survey Monkey, we'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, appreciate your time, and we'll let this go and let the next panel get set up. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.